Imagine waking up one morning and feeling that something is wrong, but you cannot explain it. The sun rises, yet it looks weak, pale, almost shy. No warmth on your skin, no sharp shadows on the ground. Days pass, weeks pass, and the sky never truly clears. Birds grow quiet, crops stop growing, and people begin to whisper a terrifying thought. What if God has turned his face away from us? Now pause for a moment. What would you think if the sun itself seemed broken? Welcome to one of the strangest and darkest years in human history. In the year 536, something happened that no one at the time could understand. Across Europe, the Middle East, and parts of Asia, daylight dimmed. Not for a day, not for a season, but for months. The Byzantine historian Procopius wrote that the sun gave off light without brightness like the moon. Cassiodorus, a Roman statesman, described a sky that looked permanently clouded, even when no clouds were there. This was not poetry. This was fear written in ink. People had no science for this, no weather forecasts, no explanations. All they had were prayers and silence in return. Before we continue this journey together, let me gently invite you to do something simple. If stories like this help you slow down, relax, or see the past in a new way, you are warmly welcome here. You can support the channel by subscribing, tapping the like button, or quietly sharing this video with someone who enjoys thoughtful stories before sleep. And if you feel like it, leave a comment. Tell me where you're watching from, or what made you click on this story tonight. I read every single one. Now get comfortable, let the room grow quiet, and let us continue. Back then, people did not think in terms of climate events or volcanic ash. They thought in signs, in warnings, in punishment. When the sun lost its strength, faith itself began to tremble. Because in a world where God controlled the harvest, the light and the seasons, a darkened sky felt deeply personal, and this was only the beginning. As the light faded, something else followed close behind. Something that crept into the fields, the granaries, and the stomachs of ordinary families. Let us step gently into what happened next. The story gently shifts now away from human ambition and into something far more unsettling. Not a war, not a king, not even a plague yet. This part begins with the sky itself behaving strangely. Imagine waking up one morning and realizing the sun no longer looks like the sun. It rises, yes, but it feels weak, pale. More like the moon behind fog than the blazing star people trusted with their lives. Birds still sing, but crops hesitate. Shadows look wrong. Days pass and the light never fully returns. In the year 536, writers across Europe, the Middle East and Asia all describe the same thing without ever speaking to one another. A dim sun, a cold summer, failed harvests. The Byzantine historian Procopius wrote that the sun gave forth its light without brightness like the moon for nearly an entire year. Tree ring data from modern scientists confirms it. Trees across Scandinavia, North America and Central Asia simply stopped growing that year. Something in the atmosphere blocked sunlight on a global scale. Today, most historians and climate scientists believe a massive volcanic eruption, or possibly several eruptions, filled the sky with ash and sulfur. The result was a sudden drop in temperature. Crops failed from Ireland to China. Famine followed quickly. In parts of China, historical records mention summer snowfall. In Ireland, chronicles record a failure of bread from the years 536 to 539. Now here is the part that hits emotionally. These people had no science to explain this, no satellites, no climate models, just prayers that seemed to go unanswered. Imagine kneeling in a small wooden church asking God for sunlight, while week after week the world grows colder and darker. What would you think? What would you feel? Some believed it was the end of days. Others thought God had turned his face away from humanity. And honestly, can you blame them? Even the wealthiest empires could not buy warmth or light. Gold cannot photosynthesize wheat, and yet this was only the opening act. Because when weakened bodies meet hunger, something else always follows. Something invisible, something far deadlier. And as the darkness lingered, it quietly prepared the world for the next blow. As the cold tightens its grip, another presence quietly enters the room. It does not arrive with thunder or fire. It arrives on ships in grain sacks in the fur of rats, slipping through ports and marketplaces while no one is watching. By the year 541, the Eastern Roman Empire begins to feel it. At first, it looks like a fever. A swelling here, a cough there. Then people start collapsing in the streets of Constantinople. Entire households go silent overnight. The historian Procopius, the same man who noticed the dim sun, now writes something even more chilling. He says the dead were so numerous that bodies were stacked in towers and thrown into the sea. Some estimates suggest that at its peak, the plague killed up to 10,000 people per day in the capital alone. This becomes known to us as the Plague of Justinian. Modern researchers believe it was caused by Yersinia pestis, the same bacterium behind the Black Death centuries later. DNA evidence recovered from ancient graves supports this. But for the people living through it, there was no Latin name, no microscope, just fear, confusion, and the unbearable question whispered behind closed doors. Why us? Imagine surviving famine only to face a disease that ignores wealth, faith, and status. The emperor himself, Justinian, is infected and barely survives. Priests pray until their voices fail. Doctors argue, bleed patients, burn incense, and hope for the best. Nothing works. And the most unsettling part is not just the death, it is the randomness. One person survives, the next does not. What kind of divine logic is that? Here is a strange detail that often gets overlooked. Some sources describe people becoming strangely numb, not just tired, but emotionally exhausted. When death becomes constant, grief has no time to breathe. Funerals become routine. Silence replaces screaming. Have you ever noticed how the mind tries to protect itself by going quiet when pain lasts too long? Yet even here, small acts of humanity flicker. Neighbours carry the sick. Strangers bury strangers. The world feels abandoned, yes, but it is not entirely empty. And still the question hangs in the air unanswered. If God has not abandoned humanity, why does the suffering keep escalating? The answer, or at least the next piece of it, lies not in heaven, but in how people begin to reinterpret faith, power, and meaning when everything familiar collapses. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, something shifts inside the survivors. When disaster does not end, people stop asking when it will be over and start asking what it means. Across the Mediterranean world, faith does not disappear, but it changes shape. Some people cling to it more tightly than ever. Churches fill not with hope, but with bargaining. Promises are made in whispers. If this ends, I will change. If this stops, I will be better. Others drift in the opposite direction. They look at the empty streets, the mass graves, the unanswered prayers, and feel a quiet anger rising. If God is still watching, why does the world look like this? There are records from this period that feel almost painfully human. In sermons preserved from the 6th century, bishops struggle to explain suffering without sounding hollow. Some say the disasters are punishment. Others warn against saying that at all. Because what kind of God punishes children, farmers, and people who are already starving? Interestingly, not everyone turns inward. Some turn practical. Laws are rewritten because there are not enough people left to work the land. Emperor Justinian issues edicts trying to freeze wages and prices according to the Codex Justinianus, because labour has suddenly become scarce. Imagine that moment. So many have died that surviving workers become valuable and the system panics. Monasteries grow, not because life is peaceful, but because uncertainty is unbearable. If the world feels broken, at least the rhythm of prayer offers structure. Wake, work, eat, pray, sleep, repeat. Does that sound familiar to modern ears? And here is the quiet irony. While many believe God has abandoned humanity, people begin caring for one another in ways the empire never organised before. Charity expands. Hospitals, primitive by our standards, become more common through church networks. So perhaps abandonment is not the full story. Perhaps what people are really experiencing is the collapse of old explanations. And once those collapse, something new, fragile and deeply human starts to form. That fragile shift carries us toward the final question. When the world finally grows quieter again, what story do people tell themselves about surviving the year they thought heaven had gone silent? And yet while some people searched inward, others searched for someone to blame. When fear lingers too long, it rarely stays quiet. In many regions, rumours begin to spread faster than any disease or famine ever could. Whispers move through villages and city streets. Someone must have caused this. Someone must have angered heaven. And too often, those someones are neighbours who already live on the margins. Historical records from Europe and the Near East show rising accusations during this period. Minority communities, especially Jewish populations, are blamed for divine punishment, poisoned wells, or secret sins. Even though there is no evidence, fear does not ask for proof. It asks for relief. And blame feels like relief even when it is cruel. At the same time, strange new beliefs begin to appear. Apocalyptic preachers claim the end of the world has arrived. Others predict specific dates for final judgment. Chroniclers like Gregory of Tours describe crowds abandoning homes, convinced that nothing earthly matters anymore. Imagine selling everything you own because someone promised the sky would open next week. And then there are the quieter stories. Parents struggling to explain suffering to their children. Farmers planting crops even though they're not sure anyone will be alive to harvest them. A kind of stubborn hope hides beneath the despair. If the world truly ends, why bother planting seeds at all? Here is the irony that history loves. The more people fear abandonment, the more human flaws are exposed. Fear breeds cruelty, yes, but it also reveals courage. There are records of neighbours sheltering one another, of priests refusing to endorse violence, of communities choosing care over panic. So let me ask you something. If you truly believed the world was under divine judgment, what would you become, harsher, kinder, or simply quieter? As the years pass and the skies remain stubbornly silent, survivors are forced to face one final realization. The world did not end. God did not speak. And now they must decide how to live in the aftermath of that terrifying uncertainty. And slowly, almost awkwardly, life has to continue. The sun does not suddenly shine brighter. The cold years do not apologize. But people wake up one morning and realize something quietly astonishing. They are still here. The world bruised and shaken is still turning. And whatever silence they feared from heaven, it did not mean the end of everything. Historians now believe this period, especially the years around 536, was one of the harshest climate shocks in human history. Tree ring data from Europe and Asia shows almost no growth for more than a decade. Ice cores taken from Greenland reveal massive volcanic eruptions that likely filled the sky with ash, dimming the sun across continents. The Byzantine historian Procopius wrote that the sun gave forth its light without brightness, like the moon for nearly a year. To people living through it, this did not feel like weather. It felt personal. And yet something remarkable happens after the fear fades. Societies adapt. New farming techniques spread. Trade routes shift. Empires weaken, but smaller communities grow more resilient. Some historians even argue that this catastrophe helped reshape the medieval world, clearing the ground for new systems, new beliefs, and new beginnings. Here is the quiet lesson history leaves on the table, like a note you find long after the guest has gone. When people believed God had abandoned them, what truly tested them was not faith itself, but how they treated one another in the absence of certainty. Some chose fear, some chose cruelty, but many chose patience, cooperation, and a very human kind of hope. And maybe that is the uncomfortable truth. Silence does not always mean abandonment. Sometimes it means the answer is being written slowly through human hands. If you listen closely, history whispers this again and again. The darkest years do not only destroy, they reveal. They strip away illusions and show who we become when no one promises rescue. So tonight, as the world around you feels uncertain in its own modern way, remember this. People have stared into dim skies before. They have asked the same questions. They have felt the same fear. And still, they found ways to keep going. Thank you for spending this quiet time with me, for listening, for wondering, and for letting history unfold gently before sleep. If this story stayed with you, I hope you will stay with this channel too. There are many more nights, many more forgotten moments, and many more human stories waiting just beyond the dark.